Malcolm Hoenlein is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the coordinating body on international and national concerns for 52 national Jewish organizations. He previously served as the founding executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater New York and was the founding executive director of the Greater New York Conference on Soviet Jewry. Malcolm has a master's degree in international relations from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was also a National Defense Fellow at the university's Near East Center. He has also served as a Middle East specialist at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia and has served on the editorial staff of Orbis, the Journal of International Relations. Thanks for being here, Malcolm. Joseph Braude is a Middle Eastern expert. Born to an Iraqi Jewish family in Providence, Rhode Island, Joseph studied Near Eastern languages at Yale and Arabic and Islamic history at Princeton. He is fluent in Arabic, Persian, and Hebrew, and has lived, studied, and worked in most Middle Eastern capitals. His writing has appeared in the New Republic, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times Sunday Magazine, Playboy, and Glamour, amongst other publications. Since 2010, he has had a weekly Arabic radio commentary, Letters from New York, which airs nationally in Morocco on Radio MED. He is the author of 2 books, The New Iraq and The Honored Dead, A Story of Friendship, Murder, and the Search for Truth in the Arab World. Malcolm, what are the most significant implications for Israel on the international level as a result for the Arab Spring?
Well, first we'll have to see what the Arab Spring results in before we can judge what the impact is. But I think for the interim, there have been beneficial aspects. I have traveled to many of the Arab countries over the last year, and I see a different attitude towards Israel, even though that we see the pronouncements now coming from some of the countries reiterating some of the old lines and trying to break relations with Israel and criticizing Israel. But I think what emerges is an impression that Israel is a source of stability in the region, not instability. That many of the countries talk about Israel in a very different way and seek to have relations. They envy Israel. They want to have democracy like Israel. They want to have the educational standards of Israel. And my hope is that the people will drive this process. Unfortunately, we've seen that it's been hijacked in some countries, but I'm hopeful that in the long run, the people will in fact be able to dictate and be able to fulfill those aspirations. For Israel, having neighbors that are true democracies is an immense benefit, not only because they can share with them their expertise, trade with them, develop better relations, but also democracies don't go to war with one another. And the hope is for a more peaceful region.
Is it possible that these countries won't become democracies? I think people are concerned in places like Egypt and Tunisia, and who knows what will happen in Syria, but that these places actually won't end up being democracies.
I think that's a very great likelihood, and that's of great concern, especially for Egypt, the most powerful of the Arab countries. I was there twice in the last year, and the leaders themselves expressed concerns because of the economic collapse, because of the growth of Al-Qaeda and Bedouin radicalization, etc., in the Sinai, which has become almost a lawless land. The internal divisions, the fact that many of those who drove it towards democracy are today being marginalized in the political process, with the 75% or 72% of the seats going to the Salafists and to the Muslim Brotherhood, and the fact that Muslim Brotherhoods want to cross all of North Africa. That could bode against democracy, because the general trend to see of the Muslim Brotherhood is not to support a democratic process. But I'm hopeful that the people, again, will be heard, that we will see emerging out of this. Maybe it'll take time, maybe it'll be an evolutionary process, but that they will be able to have their voices heard and will take control of this process.
But democracy, of course, is not just a system of elections. It's also the civil society institutions that guarantee an ongoing rotation of power, and it's the NGOs, civil society groups, women's groups, labor, and so on, that guarantee civil discourse over a sustained period of time. And we in the U.S. and many countries in the West have not really been on the ground in fostering these civil society institutions. And so by default, what we find are the machineries of Islamist groups that are backed by petro-endowments, whether Saudi or Iranian, in trying to fill that void with their own ideas.
I think this is a very important point, that the tendency in the West, we saw it in relationship to Gaza when Hamas got elected, it was the U.S. that really pressed for that election. The mock elections are the end of the process of democratization. You have to have the institution building. One of the leaders of an Arab country told me just 10 days ago. He said, look, there's no tradition of opposition parties. He said, we have no center, left, and right. You have to develop it. He said, it takes 3 to 5 years, and he is looking for solutions. They are moving towards reform. But the point that you make about the necessity to build the institutions, and the West tends to look at the results and then walk away, rather than now is the time to engage. Now is the time for us to be investing in these countries to help them and to help the positive forces. And what we are doing, because the Muslim Brotherhood was the only organized opposition, they filled the void. And we, I think, frankly, have failed to live up to our
So
responsibility.
should the U.S. be engaging groups like the Muslim Brotherhood? I know that traditionally they have not wanted to deal with such organizations. They think of them as Hamas and the Taliban, and whether they're the same or not is fairly irrelevant, but the U.S. has traditionally not wanted to negotiate with these
There
kinds of
used to
groups.
be an important binary question of whether or not to engage these groups. The concern being that while you may learn something from them by talking to them, you also grant legitimacy. But that has been overtaken by events, because now they won their legitimacy on the ground, fair and square. They are winning elections. And the question becomes, what are the opportunities? Who within these groups can one speak with and find common ground with? Are there differences, or are these groups truly monolithic? Perhaps it differs from one country to the next. I spend a lot of time in the region studying various political streams, and I think that the first problem is that there hasn't been a commitment to studying these groups. In a way, on that old debate, both sides have invested in presenting it as a monolith, including those who have been the most avid proponents of dialogue all along, have essentially said that in general they're all reformist with an Islamist hue, essentially the closest thing to liberals, and that's not true either. But there are opportunities, and I'd love to go into that
Sure,
with
we're
you
going to
about
come
some of
back
the
to
more
that
specific
in a little
ones.
bit. But what is Israel doing strategically in terms of, anticipating that? I think the idea on the ground is that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to win out in most of these countries. So what are they doing to strategize to get ready for this? Are they working with them yet? Are they not? What kind of steps can they take?
Israel, well,
Go-
let me
no,
just
you
say,
go ahead,
because I
sure.
wanted to just
Yeah.
comment on his last point, which again I agree with in essence, but the problem with the Muslim Brotherhoods, is one of the pro-Western Arab leaders said to us recently, is that people think they're not related, that it's a nuanced approach, and we have not done enough to try to analyze and understand the dynamics within each group and where there is an opportunity. The problem is that as a general rule, it is not an opportunity, and we ought not to have a blanket rule of engagement with Muslim Brotherhood. We have to do this on a country-by-country basis, assessing where there are opportunities. Are there other forces? Do we diminish the pro-democratic forces by strengthening the Muslim Brotherhood and anti-democratic forces? And what he said to me is it's a mistake on the part of the United States to think that they don't coordinate. He said the Muslim Brotherhood in my capital meets with the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo every month. They do share and they do coordinate. So it is a complicated issue, and we tend to look at it with simplistic terms, and that's a mistake. The way sometimes we talk about the Ennahda Party in Tunisia, which was formed in 1979 as a result of the Iranian Revolution, and yet it is presented as this Western-oriented, and we see already they talk about Sharia law, etc. So it works both ways, and I do think that the idea that we have to look at each country, assess it, see where our interests lie, how we can strengthen the right forces. Unfortunately, too often we do the reverse.
Joseph, we hear mostly in the media about concerns that Israel has with these countries, about democracy winning out, not democracy not winning out, but what are the available opportunities, regardless of what happens?
Well, as closed societies open up, all kinds of voices come out of the woodwork that we've never heard from before. And often the first reaction to the fall of an anti-Western, anti-Israel dictator is to say, hey, maybe there was something good about those Israelis all along, because we were very unhappy with that dictator. And so there's this intense curiosity that I encounter all the time. Recently, a Libyan group of youth broadcasters, self-starters, they've reached out, they want to learn about Israel and who these people really are. Unfortunately, there are not Israelis for them to interact with. Israel does not have the capacity, has not invested in the capacity to connect, to take advantage of the opportunities in social media technology, Skype, of crossing all of these boundaries. And so a group like these Libyan young people eventually voiced frustration. They said, we're interested in talking to Israelis, and we're not able to reach anybody.
But what can be said about the images? I think in the mainstream media in America, the only thing people see, and in Israel, are Israeli flags being burned, United States flags being burned, especially in places like Libya. I know that in the beginning, the Arab League really wanted the Americans to act on the behalf of the Libyan people, but then when they did, they rescinded their support and said there was too much force. So how can we, what is anybody supposed to do about something like that?
Well, and I think that, as I have a feeling Malcolm will agree, there is this fixation on finding accord with the dominant extremist or Islamist groups. And it's important not to marginalize the softer voices that are not in the streets, that are not burning flags, but are nonetheless interested in talking, and they may not be affiliated or well-funded by
these people being
groups.
marginalized within their countries?
I think that we contribute to their marginalization by writing them off. We've written them off for a very long time.
Well, I think there's a multifaceted process here which results in the marginalization both by us and by others and our not understanding, and sometimes our willingness to deal with the worst elements rather than working and strengthening and emboldening the like we did in Iran after the election. We did not stand up, and when the students went demonstrating, we did not stand up with them. We did not do, and if you look at the demonstrations in Syria, there are not demonstrations against Israel. They're against Hezbollah, they're against Khamenei, they're against Russia and China. I drove around in Cairo on several occasions to look to see if there were any signs. None of the signs dealt with Israel. And I'm not saying that there's a love fest, and I'm not saying there won't be problems, but they get incited to the problem. That is not the position of the people. And I think in other countries, I would hope that the capacity would be developed. For instance, Israelis now are using Facebook and other means to reach out to Iranians on a person-to-person level. This is, I think, very productive, and you're right, Israel is a mystery to a lot of the people. All they know it from is the propaganda and the coverage, the limited coverage that exists within the Arab world.
Is it important, though? I would think a lot of the support, on Facebook, okay, but public support, accepting the support from Israel, these marginalized people we're talking about, they can't. Exactly. So what does it mean in the long run? I have the feeling with all of these question marks, Israel will be hesitant to really do anything and will be kind of heeding in President Obama's lead from behind, wait and see. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I think this is most prevalent in Syria, too, about not knowing what to do. I know that in the north, they are setting up refugee camps in case there's a flood of refugees from Syria. But the question is, if there are refugees from Syria or from anywhere else or anything, what does this mean for relations in the future?
I was going to say, there is this legitimate concern about the so-called kiss of death, that if we if we talk to or bless liberal groups, progressive groups, it marginalizes them by definition in their society. I actually don't buy it. I think that you'd be surprised how bold young people can be in speaking out against these tropes, in saying, this anti-normalization crusade is not ours. There's nothing in our holy book that says we can't talk to Israelis and so on. And the question becomes, how exactly do you access those people?
I think it's the difference between an embrace and the effort to give them knowledge, give them opportunities. I do think an embrace at this point could be very dangerous to some, and we want to do everything we can to strengthen those elements. But I think, we're in the midst of the turmoil. We don't know what the outcome will be. What we can do is look now what role the United States and Israel are so closely identified in the minds and in the reactions of a lot of the people. But there were some incredible things that appeared during the course in Saudi Arabia and other countries where guys were writing articles, people in major publications, talking about rethinking the relationship with Israel. Now, as far as I know, they weren't executed and not even arrested. I don't know if they wrote a second article, but we know that that some of these things appeared where they talked about the educational standards. Two of the leading journalists in Saudi Arabia wrote a piece, and they said, we wish we could see our elementary school teachers who kept preaching to us that Israel would disappear. Look where Israel is today, look where we are. Israeli armies are defending their citizens, ours are killing our citizens. So again, I think there's a lack of knowledge and understanding about the Middle East that is pervasive. I think that the role that Israel can play, what Israel has to offer, if more ways were found to communicate this to the people, that you would find responsive elements especially amongst the young people, who are not just curious, but want the change. When you ask Palestinians what government would they like, they say like Israel. So you ask them, do they want peace with Israel, you might get a different response, but they come to appreciate what that stands for.
What role do the Arab Israelis play in this? Are they in communication with their Arab brethren?
Informally, as we've talked about,
Sure.
Informally, Arab Israelis play a very interesting role when they're in Arab countries. While to Israelis, there's sort of a discomfort, a feeling that they're Arabs and not more than they are Israelis. In the Arab world, in Jordan, in other countries where they have the opportunity to visit, they're seen as a fifth column to them. They're seen as Israelis. And they are in a position of representing Israel to their cousins, for example, across the Jordan River. And often saying, look, things are not as bad as it looks on TV. We're in business with them, we go to school with them, and so on. And so their role as cultural emissaries on an informal basis has been profound, especially with Palestinians in Jordan.
Is this making any kind of difference inside the Palestinian territories, the Arab Spring? Is it conceivable that something on this level of Libya or Syria could happen in the Palestinian territories? I don't mean just an intifada, I mean a real redo, pushing the reset button in the Palestinian territories.
I think yes. I think that you see some elements of it. People are tired of the corruption. People are tired of the lack of progress, even though their economy has grown. And I think because of that, you've had more quiet.
Are we speaking really just about the West Bank right now?
Only the West Bank. In Gaza, you do have elements of it, but it's being translated in different ways. You can have the Shiite increase in conversions to Shiism for those who want to identify with it amongst, let's say, Islamic Jihad, etc. You have real opposition to the corruption that Hamas has imposed upon them, the limitations on their societies, etc. But if you look, there was an interesting piece that was done during these days about the West Bank, where people spoke out more openly than I have seen about criticizing the solidarity committees around the world for fostering hatred between Palestinians and Jews, saying that the same does not exist in the territories themselves, that there's much more comedy, much more interaction. I'm not saying it's a love fest and it's birthday parties every day, but the fact is that they work together. Is the economy in the West Bank, thanks to Israel's intercession as well, has improved. They get a lot of foreign aid, they get a lot of assistance, there's a lot more to be done. The educational levels have improved. There are signs of things that could be a model for the future. And I hope that the leadership would give them the opportunity to be able to pursue that. They don't.
Is the current leadership, can it be salvaged? Can they bring these people to what they need?
Abbas, I think it's
It's too late, too little, too late.
And much too late.
Since we're talking about leadership, I'll get in a quick moment about Islamists and the question of opportunities.
Sure.
I think it's worth drawing a distinction between Islamists in ex-military republics that are now winning elections and Islamists in kingdoms, Jordan and Morocco, that have been cooperating in many ways with those pro-Western monarchs for a very long time. So in Morocco, where an Islamist prime minister recently elected now shares power with a king, there are indications that that prime minister would like to play a role as a kind of an intermediary between Morocco's friends in Israel and the United States and Islamist groups like those of Egypt and Gaza.
I think something similar is happening in Jordan with King Abdullah.
There is a long tradition of this in Jordan. The U.S. sent the Islamic Action Front into Iraq to negotiate with al-Qaeda on behalf of American hostages. The very credibility that the IAF had gained for its extremist positions enabled it to talk to the al-Qaeda group in Iraq. So these things are sort of indirect and quite messy and complex, but they're worth looking into.
Can I just say a quick word?
Sure,
I think that
quickly.
we can't look at this if we don't understand that the democracy was not the major driving force here. It was a factor for some people, but it was economics, the food price of food going up, the fact that you have a lot of fake states that are involved here, that the internet revolution. There are many other factors that shape all this, and in each country it is unique. The kingdoms, because of the status of the king, it's different in their relationships. That not only goes to the religious level, goes for the societal level as well.
Association's Understanding Israel. Join us next time. Malcolm, Joseph, thanks for joining.
Thanks, John.